blockchains can do. So the next panel is all about proof of good. So what is the social impact and the civic tech that blockchains can potentially facilitate? And for that, we have our moderator, Caffyn from CoinDesk, and I will allow her to introduce her panelists in a moment.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jeremy, for that introduction. As he mentioned, this is the panel on proof of good. So far today, we've heard quite a lot about the financial innovations and applications of blockchain technology. But we wanted to kind of change things up a bit here and talk about it as a force for social good. How can it help ordinary people? So admittedly, it's quite a broad topic. So I've got three very different speakers to help me tackle it today. I've got Bill Tai, who is a long-time angel investor VC. He's invested in over 100 different companies worldwide. He's also on the board at Bitfury, which is Bitcoin's best capitalized mining firm. Next to him is John Edge, managing partner at RedRose. He's also the co-founder of Identity 2020, which is a blockchain project working to give undocumented children a digital identity. And finally, we have Chelsea Barabas, who heads up social impact at MIT Media Lab's Digital Currency Initiative, which is building lots of exciting blockchain projects, which she will speak a bit about today. They also work to connect the research community with various different organizations. So I wanted to kick off with an open question. Is Bitcoin still a solution in search of a problem in terms of this kind of topic?
Who wants to go first?
Sounds like you.
Oh, that's a surprise. I think that you could probably pivot that question off straight away and go, well, why don't we start with problems? Mm-hmm. And it's somewhat about the conversation of this panel is we have lots of conversations on technology and the makeup of the current ecosystem. We have lots of conversations on demographics. It is heavily weighted on the technology side. And if we go to the business side of the house, there's not a heavy weighting of business. So Bitcoin looking for a problem, I think there's a different way to put it round is if you go to somebody and say, there's a mainframe in the cloud. Hang on, we had mainframes a while ago, but there's a way to keep a registry of things that automatically updates that everybody can use, that can be trusted, that exists, that didn't exist before. Then all of a sudden, people with problems who haven't been able to solve them go, hang on, that might work. The fact that the Bitcoin token has proven a consensus system works, well, there are other types of these things that can be used for, say, a key registry for identity. Mm-hmm. We've not been able to create birth certificates for 230 million kids because building that centralized server architecture and running the cost of it and somehow running it across 4 different NGOs who overlap in one South Cambodian community doesn't work. But Bitcoin is the first use case for a consensus system. Good idea. Got everybody's brains thinking. Then the application of that simple, can we keep a registry together that constantly updates, that can be shared n times? What problem does that solve? I think that's the place to start. Because then what happens is there are plenty of people in this audience, and there's somebody specifically sat up the top right corner over there who's built a global transaction network, very similar to what Blythe's building. There are people who've got the problems. It's just that this potential solution didn't exist. Mm-hmm. So what I'd say is, Bitcoin, great demonstration of what a consensus system can do. Stop. Now we know what a consensus system is. Educate people who know the problems, who own the problems, and have them go, huh, right, well, real-time settlement in capital markets that we currently do T+5. Ooh.
Okay. And I mean, in terms of getting those people to understand these problems, who is it that should be doing that work? I mean, Chelsea, you guys do a lot of kind of broader education, and people come to you a lot with use cases, and you connect them with various researchers. Can you tell us a bit more about your work?
Sure, yeah, and I was just thinking about how I'd answer the last question, thinking about how MIT has grown its interest over time. You know, technology is in the title of our university, right? But as a former MIT student myself, just graduated in June, I know that most of the students and faculty that we have are very much they don't put the technology center. It's the problem that they want to solve, and figuring out what tools are at their disposal to solve those problems. And I think what we've started to see over the last couple of years is what a remarkable breadth of problems across the different schools within MIT are seeing the blockchain and kind of this space as a useful toolkit for addressing problems, whether it be in the financial realm or be around secure multi-party computation, whether it be around privacy, security, things like that. So that, I think, as, again, more and more awareness about the types of problems that could be relevant to this technology has kind of grown, you've seen that interest grow amongst ourselves. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Actually, if I could add a commercial perspective, because I actually, you guys have answered it, but I think from as a board member of Bitfury, I don't look at Bitcoin as a problem looking for a solution, but really more of a subset. Bitcoin is a subsidy to a solution looking to invite applications to run on it. And if my own individual vision for what Bitfury should be, I think all the miners have this sort of perception of being kind of like money grubbing, like pile up a bunch of assets and all that stuff. But what we really want to do with this company is build a worldwide distributed architecture that has an API on it that can run anything that is this kind of technology. Of course, it's going to start with one flavor of it, which is the Bitcoin algorithm, but the company has all the capability to develop whatever kind of silicon architectures we need to do, and what we'd like to do is open it up so that it can run other things, because as an investor, given the structure of the mining rewards and where they tail off and end at some point, we need to have, basically, I describe the company as a distributed transaction processing engine that will open itself up for other people to run whatever they want. And if we're providing value, then we should have an economic position to earn a return on it. Okay. And those solutions can be for social good, they can be commercial, they can be lots of things.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that's a template that other companies in the Bitcoin space should then adopt, having this profit-driven aspect, but then also, you've done a lot of stuff with Hernando de Soto.
Yes.
Around identity and like title deeds and things like that, and ownership. Do you think that there is a greater need for Bitcoin companies to implement their own kind of social initiatives and kind of giving back? Do you think it's their responsibility to do that?
I think it's going to happen. I think market forces will force that to happen anyway, because I think if you were only thinking about it as a miner, then from an investor standpoint, it'd be like buying shares in a gold mine. You have an asset, you can value that asset, put maybe some kind of multiple on it, and subtract the cost of like digging it out of the ground, but that's not a long-lasting, growing equity model that chunks every day and gets bigger. And so I think the survivors that are capitalized well enough, I think, are going to get pulled into that. And things like Hernando, John and I were involved, as well as MIT Media Lab, in a little kind of exercise where we got a lot of interesting people to come up with socially good applications to run on blockchain infrastructure. And Hernando, this is a great example of things you could do. Hernando wrote a book 12, 15 years ago called The Mystery of Capital that basically outlined why developed economies developed and undeveloped didn't, all really around the concept of ownership of land, the titling of an asset. And if you owned your land, you would invest in it, and you could take that title to the bank and get a mortgage, and that money would be your capital. If you're in an undeveloped nation and a squatter, nothing happened, right? So we together tried to work with Hernando. We did work with Hernando to find ways to implement the notion of titling of land assets on a blockchain. John's working on identity on the blockchain. We created a carbon credits marketplace implemented on the blockchain conceptually. So there's lots of ways to take this that are just we're on the verge of something very big, and it's really cool to see.
I think we can take your question and categorize it. So the question is should Bitcoin blockchain companies. And I think we want to break that out. In any business, there's people, you could simplify it to 3 activities: building something, selling something, and financing something. So when we look at the activities, we have a lot of build going on at the moment. Now, salesmen are naturally born to sell something, and if you give a salesperson a product that they can't sell, they won't sell it and they don't work for you. And we maybe want to think of populating the sales bubble with people with viable use cases for now that can then give the builders something to build that can be validated, so the financiers can look at that and go, well, I'll pay money for that because the salesperson's demonstrated the use case. So there's a way to set the ecosystem up. At the same time, and I think this touches on important functions within the community, you have one circle which is established institutions. And that's the big companies. And you have one circle that's the innovators. And at the moment, they're pretty static. And you need to put a circle between the two that brings the two together. And that joining circle, we need to think very carefully about it. And I'll poke a little bit of fun at sort of alma mater organizations, but everybody has an innovation hub. And everybody has a blockchain innovation hub. And it's interesting to me that we talk about a consensus system or a blockchain as a way of sharing, distributing trust, but yet every big organization doesn't trust any other organization, so we've got our innovation lab, and we're going to build use cases. There's 20 of them. What on earth are they doing? Why have they got 20 sets of headcount working on 20 finder use cases when the kids on the internet have already done all the use cases? You can there's 91 of them. This panel, to me, is not to talk about the technology. Plenty of people can do that. This is to talk about, ironically, the biggest inhibitor to the growth of consensus systems might be the fact that humans can't come to consensus and can't agree with each other, which is a bit daft. And this fits in there with, I could put my hand up straight away and go, it's screamingly obvious that MIT are good at this stuff. They've been doing it for a long time. MIT have an innovation hub. Why are there 20 corporate innovation hubs with 20 separate things with the logo on the front? Why don't they just do it at MIT? And I'm not selling MIT. They could do it at Stanford. They could do it at UCL. But this is why I'm on this panel. They're the questions we should be asking. For this one is, what are the barriers to social impact? Mr. Moore has probably solved the technology barriers. The technology will work at some point. The barriers are likely the inability for humans to come to consensus, which is rather hilariously going on in the blockchain fork world. So I think it's a good point to pass over to Chelsea to say, how do you come to consensus as humans? Like, at MIT, you've got to get organizations to come to consensus to work with you on open platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's coming to consensus as much as creating space for people to do that kind of this kind of experimentation in a place where there's still a lot of unknowns.
So I'll qualify my consensus to getting people to agree to work together.
Sure, to
so
work.
Why don't we get 4 banks to work at MIT instead of work on their own projects? There are these things. These are the things that stand out to me as an observer, is how to get the consortiums going.
So I think the real value add for us is being able to ask the types of questions that are too risky for certain kinds of institutions or companies to be able to take on their own, or are going to be too costly for them to do internally. So, in addition to companies, we're also talking to a lot of the public sector institutions and governments who are also surprisingly very keen to not only learn about this technology, but also understand how they could harness it to serve public interest, right? For governments, though, the whole model of fail fast, learn fast is not something that you're going to exactly win an election on. So MIT is a place where that kind of experimentation and that partnership can be really meaningful. But I think it could be really meaningful in the private sector as well. Really consolidating and coordinating interests at this phase. It's so exciting in this community. You don't see a lot of head-to-head competition and animosity between even people who are working in the same domains, because we're all still trying to learn right now. And everything that we're doing is contributing to the same ecosystem that we're all invested in having mature.
Can I ask the audience a question? Who in this room is from Silicon Valley? Just raise a hand, just out of curiosity. So it looks like it's like 5 or 10% or something. Yeah, so I once was trying to explain to somebody how Silicon Valley functions and why it works the way it works. And And as you describe the different fiefdoms, like if you look at the older industries of mainframe computers, like the old phone systems, you had these giant entities that were all competing and they all had to replicate their own functions and all that stuff. It's kind of a waste of time. And I said, well, like Silicon Valley, you basically have to think of it like a stock market of people, where the people are like shares of a security floating around in this thing. And if a good idea, like, if you think about how a stock market works, if there's a really good idea that's working, all the money flows up under it and pushes it up to the sky. In Silicon Valley, it's a very liquid base of people that are sort of free floating. And if there's a really good idea, all the people kind of run up to it and push it up into the sky. And if you want to build a Google, like there's no other place in the world where you can hire 20,000 people that did what you want them to do before for the last 5 years and inject them in and just make it happen, right? It's a super liquid marketplace. So, the question is, which of those hubs, if there can be one, can create the liquidity point for people and ideas to allow all the communication to sort of like resolve into the right things where there's efficiency in the system. And that hasn't happened yet. If you think about like the roots of Silicon Valley, John, I talked about this before, like the Homebrew Computer Club was that. In the 70s, a bunch of kids rented a room at Stanford Linear Accelerator, and those kids were like, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, Bill Gates, Bill Joy, Bechtolsheim, the people that started Sun and Apple and like 20 other companies, because they weren't working in these big companies where everyone had private armies. So I think you guys could do a lot to kind of facilitate that.
Mm-hmm. I didn't pay them to say this, I promise.
No, but now, you bring it on to the other part, and if we're going to talk about Bitcoin, then inherently, how many people in the room are from a financial technology or financial services background?
Pretty much
okay.
everyone.
So I worked in investment banking markets for a decade or so. I co-founded a financial technology company that focused on regulatory tech. Anybody who comes to me and says, I'm going to do something in capital markets that's regulated by FINRA, and I'm going to build an app with 2 kids in a garage and it's going to work, hasn't got the point of FINRA. So in this market of financial technology, these massive transformations simply will not occur in the time frame required, I'll be polite as opposed to never, unless the established institutions are brought in. So we can't have the West Coast approach to fintech because FINRA, SEC, FCA, SFC, we know that. And this is the thing that all of us in the room have got to work out how to unlock. How do we unlock the potential of the technology and the freedom of innovation, but all of us knowing that dealing in regulated markets is a complete pain in the backside? So this is a really, really difficult thing to do. And so when we talk about the potential impact, then I think that there's some great efforts going on in capital markets. However, over the last year, I've seen enormous organizations move on a relative dime when you talk about huge projects. So look at Europe at the moment. It's a refugee. There's a Twitter video of a 17-year-old girl that virtually puts you in tears, who's lost her parents, and she's in a Syrian refugee camp in Turkey. She's got no idea. She's got nothing. This person now doesn't exist. Had a life, now is invisible. When you look at that and you go, all right, we've got a refugee nightmare occurring in Europe. We've got kids all over the world. And you put that on the table, and then you add the technology piece. So you add, and I'll name drop a bit because it just gives context. There aren't that many of them. Gavin Wood, CTO of Ethereum. Patrick Deegan, Open Mustard Seed. Jeff Garzik. There aren't that many of these engineers who really get it. What you have to do is somehow get those together and the problem, and then ask the enormous corporates that get FINRA and the SEC to start moving. And what I've found incredible is these organizations move. And again, these should, not really name drops, but Barclays have been phenomenal. So tonight, Identity 2020's got an event. It's a female-led organization, which is, again, incredible for this makeup. And Barclays have put their hand in the pocket and said, well, we've got this new incubator in New York called Rise. Why don't you go in there for a year and use them all the way around the world? And you've got unlimited seats. That is something that the established organizations can do in 2 weeks.
Okay.
And so it's the fit of all that together. That's the challenge to unlock.
Okay, and I wanted to bring it back a little bit more to kind of use cases. I know, Chelsea, backstage we talked a little bit about healthcare initiatives. Can you give the audience a bit of an idea of what you guys are working on there, how you're innovating in the space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, especially just to kind of take it out of the financial realm a bit, we're looking at a broad set of use cases across the board. One that's particularly interesting is this idea of being able to do secure multi-party computation on data that's really valuable and could offer a lot of value add to society, but that right now is not very liquid. So health and education data are two really key areas that we've been talking with, city governments as well as major pharmaceutical companies and others who are really keen on figuring out how the blockchain could be used as the backbone for an infrastructure to be able to kind of enable much more like liquid data without having to compromise on user privacy. So it's an area where we're currently thinking about. I think it could apply to a lot of different domains, but health and education are the two that we're particularly interested in right now.
How do you get the, do people ring you up?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you build the awareness for what you're doing as an organization? Because that's one of the things I find is you end up in these rooms, especially governments and NGOs, and they're a bit scared of the topic, and you bring it up, and there's a gap.
Yeah, I think it usually takes one person within an organization who it clicks with first, who sees how this is relevant to their work, who then ends up, kind of broaching the conversation with their broader team. I think, though, after that happens, there's a lot of excitement within companies and govs to start exploring it. And the interest is really in learning first, and then thinking about how they can learn by doing, which is what we're trying to do with these kinds of pilots, is figure out how we can scope out a well-defined project, identify key challenges to really thinking through going from concept to implementation, and then testing it in a practical way. So that's what's really appealing, and I think as the word spreads, that's kind of MIT's motto, is learn by doing. We're just kind of a natural go-to place for that.
Okay, and I wanted to pick on something you said there about privacy versus, you said privacy versus security, sorry. There's kind of an inherent dichotomy between those two traditionally. Do you guys think that Bitcoin and blockchain in some way helps to resolve those two things, or do you think that there is still this issue of let's go to a private blockchain and have that increased privacy, or let's go with an open ledger that is perhaps more secure? Or, I mean, how do you kind of resolve those two things, if at all?
Well, one of the things, so add to that, if we don't talk about trusted computing in this conversation, we're missing half the story. It doesn't matter how good a blockchain is if you post rubbish on it. So if you use that device and you put something in it and it's compromised and it posts something else to the blockchain, it's not very useful. So what we want to talk about, to my mind, is trusted computing, which is the validity of the authenticated known device, known state. That has to be done. Otherwise, if you put rubbish on a blockchain, it's a waste of time. So first of all, you've got to go to that. So when we talk about security, it's pretty interesting to think about putting medical records on a blockchain forever that may get hacked. You wouldn't want to do that, but encrypting things and putting them there, that's interesting. So I think there are different combinations. So the whole discussion of maybe private versus public is around the stability of the organization. For instance, if the entire financial services ecosystem that moves $1 trillion plus a day put everything on the Bitcoin blockchain at the moment, not that it could technically, but imagine if it did, and there was an argument between 6 humans as to what it was going to do, that wouldn't be very good.
Sure, and for the audience, you're obviously referring to the block size debate currently going on.
Yeah, so private-public is part of one circle's debate, but you have to add encryption to that discussion, because you want to encrypt the data using devices and then use the characteristics of a ledger and a key registry system to manage the encrypted data. Does that?
Yeah, that's a great explanation. I think the key comes down to what you're using the blockchain for, right? So like we were talking about backstage, a project that some students at MIT are working on right now is called Enigma, which is basically trying to tackle this exact question. What they're doing, though, is devising a system in which you basically split up your data into thousands of little shards, spread that across several nodes in a network, that basically enables you, each node in that network can do computations on their specific little chunk of data. But in order for you to spit out some sort of return output, you have to recombine all that data together. The way you're able to do that, though, is you're able to use a blockchain basically as the directory where you find where you've spread out all of those little pieces. You're not putting that data directly on the blockchain. You're putting metadata that lets you point to where that data can be found so that the user can then combine it back together to get very targeted, specific answers for questions that they have. What that means, though, is you can do really interesting computations on that data without anybody having to hold the entire piece of it together. So you're splitting it up in a way that makes it basically impossible for that data to be kind of compromised.
And a year ago, on a panel like this, no one would have been able to articulate like that.
Right.
So now we have a whole bunch of people in the audience going, actually, if you shard the data and use the blockchain as a key registry, ooh, all right, well, and I could actually have 4 key registries. I could use Ethereum as a key registry. I could use Counter. I could use it. Ooh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. And then that's why you want to link into the talent at a place like MIT or in the Valley that's doing that, but then have people in this room apply it to the real world.
Okay, and I guess I want to kind of turn that on its head and say, what do you think we'll be sat here talking about next year?
Go on, Bill, you go first.
Well, I guess what I'd like to see talked about, I don't know that it will be, but I would love to have seen the emergence of a somewhat standardized set of APIs for people to develop to, so that the developer community stops worrying about the underlying technology and is just creating applications that may or may not be FINRA compliant, but there's kind of a way for people to just go for it. If you think about the standardization of the platform that occurred around both the PC and then the iPhone and Android today, it unlocked so much talent and it allowed so much creativity at a very granular level. That's what excites me about the blockchain. It has that potential, so I think there just needs to be enough resolution by the community of what it is, what the platform is, what the resources allocated to the developer are, and then just let it rip. And I think we'll see a very different world. I think from my perspective, I've been in venture now for about started in 1991, so 25 years. We've had a series of waves of things. We're at a point now where I think, if you look at some of the big market values, private market values, not publicly listed, but think of an Uber at 50 billion or Airbnb at 25 billion or whatever. Those are essentially companies that are asset virtualization companies. Uber's basically a 5-minute transfer of title of a car. Airbnb is a week-long transfer of your room, whatever. And so whether it's a unit of value represented by a Bitcoin or a lawnmower or a car or a rental unit, there's all these marketplaces that could be made more efficient just with a couple of keystrokes on an app if there's standardization and universal kind of agreement at the community level. So that's what I'm hoping we're talking about.
Okay.
I'll borrow a word because I'll lead on to you to close out from Brian, who works with Chelsea. So practical pilots.
He's my boss. I'm not his boss, but yeah.
So getting stuff done. What I would like to see in a year is some failed experiments and some working experiments in the real world with big customers, not on the side. So in a year's time, I'd like to see Identity 2020 Systems has delivered some technology to a government or NGO to try and include people who didn't exist. And it failed, didn't work. We'll have to try again. Or a XYZ other project did. And that's where we need to get to, is in a year's time, have some people up here who said, I had a go, I got a big customer, I applied the technology, and it didn't work, or it did. And I think that fits well into the breadth of the things you're doing.
Yeah, I think, so what I'd love to see is more discussion about methods for doing more rigorous data-based decision-making about the different design trade-offs that you could consider within these kinds of systems. I've seen almost every panel up here has asked a question about permissioned versus permissionless. this kind of thing, that's actually still a very chunky debate. There are a lot of much more nuanced kinds of decisions that we need to also start to be making around these issues of scalability, privacy, stability, and things like that. And in order to do that, we need to develop as a community better ways of simulating these different trade-offs so that we can make more informed decisions without having to take on a lot of the costs of trying to implement them in the real world first and seeing what happens. Then the second phase is then doing these in the real world pilots, once you've got more informed basis for making decisions.
Fantastic. I think we have time for one more question, or yeah. So if anyone has any questions from the audience, just having a look on Slido now. If anyone could just raise their hand if you have a question you'd like to ask any of the panelists. Yeah, in the middle.
Something I'm very interested in, it came to mind when John mentioned the birth registry for kids. I was wondering if you have any ideas about a registry for each person that's born in order to help implement the idea of a basic income for everybody as a human being on the planet.
Funny as it goes.
You should come to lunch tonight, huh?
I mean, the answer is yes, in that there is a very big ambition here, which is if you could digitally include a lot of people, and then there's big organizations like the UN who send out value to them, but in the middle it starts at $1,000 and goes down to $1 because all the frictional cost of all the middlemen. If you could build a system that could get directed digital payments to the digital identity, then you could potentially reduce fraud, reduce risk, increase compliance, and get the value to the people who need it. And there is a project on the way that's looking at that.
Cool, fantastic. Thank you to my wonderful panelists. I think that's all we've got time for. I'll let you guys get to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.